We asked our viewers to send us first-hand accounts of their stories of demonic possession. This story comes to us from Michigan, and it's going to scare the living shit out of you. My name is Nicole. Before this started, my life was normal. I live alone in a small house. I work a regular office job. I attend church most Sundays, though I would not describe myself as especially devout. I believed in God, but I did not think much about demons or possession. That changed over the course of about 2 weeks. The first thing I noticed was a sense of discomfort that I could not explain. It was not pain exactly. It felt more like something was off inside my body. At first, I thought I was getting sick. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one evening and feeling like I could not sit still. I kept shifting in my chair. I felt restless and irritated without any clear reason. Over the next few days, this feeling got worse. I started having trouble sleeping. I would lie in bed and feel like my body was tense, even when I tried to relax. I also started having thoughts that did not feel like my own. That is the best way I can describe it. They were not voices at first, just intrusive thoughts that seemed out of place. For example, I would be making coffee and suddenly think something aggressive or negative that did not match how I usually think. I tried to ignore it. I assumed it was stress. I told myself I was overreacting. About a week into this, I began to feel physical reactions during normal activities. One of the first things that stood out was when I tried to pray. I sat on my bed and tried to say a simple prayer out loud. As I started, I felt a tightening in my chest and throat. It was strong enough that I had to stop. I tried again, and the same thing happened. It felt like resistance, but from inside my own body. That was when I started to feel concerned. A few days later, I went to church. During the service, I felt uneasy the entire time. When the pastor began reading scripture, I felt a strong sense of irritation and discomfort. I remember gripping the edge of the bench in front of me. My hands were shaking slightly. I did not understand why I was reacting that way. After that service, I went home and tried to ignore it, but things escalated that night. I woke up sometime after midnight. I do not know the exact time, but it was dark and quiet. I woke up suddenly, as if something had startled me. My body felt stiff. I tried to move, and I could, but it felt slow and heavy. I also felt something else. It is difficult to describe, but it felt like there was a presence inside me that was not me. I know how that sounds. I would not have believed it before, but that is what it felt like. After that night, I could not dismiss what was happening. The thoughts became more aggressive. I started hearing what I can only describe as a voice, though it did not sound like it was coming from outside. It felt internal, but separate from my own thinking. At that point, I decided to contact my pastor. I called him during the afternoon. I remember my hands shaking while I held the phone. I told him that something was wrong and that I did not feel like myself. I explained the thoughts, the physical reactions, and the feeling of something inside me. I expected him to suggest medical help, but instead he asked me several questions. He asked if I had tried to pray and what happened when I did. He asked if I felt worse when I was in church or hearing scripture. I told him yes. There was a pause on the line. Then he said he would come over that evening with a few members of the congregation. They arrived around 6 in the evening. There were about 5 people with him. At that point, I was sitting on my bed because it was the only place I felt somewhat stable. My body felt tense and uncomfortable. As I talked, I noticed that it was getting harder to stay still. My muscles were tightening without me meaning to. The pastor said they would begin with prayer. As soon as they started praying out loud, I felt a strong reaction in my body. My back arched slightly and my hands clenched. I was not doing it on purpose. It felt like a reflex. I tried to relax, but I could not. They continued praying. I started to feel heat in my chest and throat. It was not external heat. It felt like it was inside me. I also felt anger rising, but it did not feel like my own emotion. I remember saying out loud that I wanted them to stop, but part of me did not want that. That was the first time I felt clearly divided within myself. The pastor then used holy water. He told me what he was doing before he did it. When he sprinkled it on me, I had a strong reaction. At first, it just felt cold. Then, in certain areas, especially on my arms and neck, it began to feel like burning. Not extreme, but noticeable and uncomfortable. I remember saying that it burned. One of the people asked me where. I pointed to my arm. They looked at it, but there was no visible mark. The session lasted about an hour that first evening. By the end, I was exhausted. My body had been tensing and moving the entire time. I had been writhing on the bed without meaning to. It was not constant thrashing, but continuous movement that I could not fully control. They said they would return the next day. That night, I did not sleep. The sensations continued. The voice was clearer. It would respond to what I was thinking, sometimes contradicting me. I tried to pray silently, and the same resistance happened. The next day, they came back in the afternoon. This time, there were more people, maybe 8 or 9. They arranged themselves around the bed. I was already lying down because I felt too weak to stand for long. The pastor began again with prayer and scripture. As soon as it started, my body reacted more strongly than before. My legs moved, my back arched, and my hands gripped the sheets. I was aware of everything, but I could not stop the movements. They spoke directly, addressing what they believed was inside me. I will not repeat everything they said, but they commanded it to leave. During this, I felt pressure in my head and chest. The voice inside became louder and more aggressive. At one point, when the holy water was used again, the burning sensation was stronger than before. I remember saying it hurt. I was breathing heavily at that point. This session lasted longer, maybe 2 hours. By the end, I was sweating and extremely tired. The pastor said this might take several days and that they would continue. The third day was the most intense. By then, I was mostly confined to the bed because standing made me feel unstable. When they arrived, I was already feeling the internal tension. They began immediately. The reactions in my body started faster this time. Within minutes, I was writhing continuously. My back lifted off the bed at times, and my arms moved in ways I was not directing. I was still conscious and aware. I could hear everything. I could see everyone in the room, but I could not control my body fully. The pastor continued speaking firmly. The group prayed together. The room was quiet except for their voices and my movements. At one point, there was a moment where the internal pressure felt like it peaked. It is hard to describe. It felt like something resisting very strongly. My whole body tensed at once. They continued without stopping. The pastor repeated the same commands several times. Then, after what felt like a long time, there was a sudden change. The pressure dropped quickly. The tension in my body released. My muscles relaxed all at once. I stopped moving. The silence in the room was noticeable. No one spoke for a few seconds. I felt different immediately. The internal presence I had been aware of was gone. The intrusive thoughts stopped. The voice was no longer there. I started to cry, but it was not from fear. It was from relief. They continued to pray for a short time after that, but the intensity was gone. When the pastor used holy water again, it felt only cold. There was no burning. They stayed for a while to make sure I was stable. I was able to sit up without the same tension. I felt physically weak, but mentally clear. Over the next day, they checked on me again. There were no further symptoms. I was able to sleep normally for the first time in several days. It has been some time since this happened. I have not experienced any of those symptoms again. I am able to pray without any resistance. I have returned to my normal routine.